thoughts on this. Should we cut prison sentences by a third if the culprit pleads guilty? 0207 862 2222 is the number to give us a call. The former Justice Secretary Alex Chalk thinks that the judges should be able to take a third off a prison sentence when it's fair to do so if someone pleads guilty in court. He says that it would tackle the court backlog and cut prison overcrowding. At the moment, defendants are allowed time off their prison term only if they plead guilty after being charged by police when they appear in magistrates' court. This comes amid a backlog of more than 65,000 Crown Court cases and a warning during the summer that we are rapidly running out of prison places. Although I have to say, we keep hearing we're running out of prison places. Every week. It's not like, I don't know how they're getting them out. I suppose they have let a few people out. That was in the papers a couple of weeks ago. But is this a good idea, Kevin? What do you think?
I think it is. Judges used to have more discretion. Now, as you say, if you plead guilty when you're charged in your first appearance, magistrates' court, you can get a third off, and then it tapers down to about a tenth if you plead guilty on the first day of the trial. But if you plead guilty, you save whoever your victim is the ordeal of going through the court process, all that worry, all that hassle. Then you get your sentence. So I can see a value in that to us. I think it's very separate to how long of your sentence you serve in prison. And some people will think, well, if you get a third off, if you plead guilty, and then you're going to get 2/5 off to get you out of prison early, will you actually go into prison at all?
And then you only ever serve half your sentence for good behaviour?
I think it's separate to how long you serve. I've always thought you should serve your full sentence unless you, for good behaviour, tackling mental health, alcohol, drugs, literacy problems, whatever they are in prison. But I think this idea, it's extended something that is already there now. Alex Chalk was a Conservative Justice Secretary. He wasn't Labour. I think it's a good idea.
Mike, what do you reckon?
Well, I don't like any scheme which, enables people to serve less time in jail. You said you like to serve sentence, so do I. My view is jail is a deterrent. I think that was widely proved when the current government clamped down on the riots and started putting people in jail. People stopped rioting. So I do believe prison is a deterrent. So all these... I was going to ask you this, who this Alex Chalk was. This is just a point of view. It's not going to be a law, is it?
It's a point of view, but he was the Justice Secretary.
Yeah, OK.
It's a
suggestion, but it would free up courts. It could free up prison places. So it may be an idea that people think is a good one. I'll come back to you, Mike. We just need to take a break. We're going to take your calls on this after the break. So we're going back to whether criminals should get a third off their prison sentence if they plead guilty. It's a call from the former Justice Secretary who claims that it would cut the court backlogs and ease prison overcrowding. But should criminals serve their time? 0207 862 2222 is the number. And get your calls in now. I'd love to know your thoughts on this. I cut you off a little bit there, Mike, but is there a potential here that we could see this reduce court time? And that's very valuable at the moment.
Well, you see, the reason I asked about the politician was because, in my view, politicians often float ideas which are already there, you know what I mean? And it seems to me there's already a system here to reduce the amount of time you get sentenced to jail, the 1/3 thing's been going on forever. I don't quite understand the distinction between what we've already got and what is proposed here. And they make it so complicated, I don't think it'll work.
There was a change by the Sentencing Council, which I think is England and Wales. Scotland has a different system. That removed the discretion of judges about 8 years ago. And I think the idea is to restore the discretion of judges, because they are the best to judge a case. They've got people in front of them. And those...
Rather than having standard procedures.
It shouldn't just be administrative and jails. It is, from my view, it's sparing the victim that ordeal. You put your hand up, you say I'm guilty, and so there's an incentive for you. But I think like 2 in 5 people plead guilty. The other 3 in 5 think, right, I'm going to... Some will be innocent, others will think, I'm going to chance it.
I think there should be a much greater incentive to criminals to plead guilty if the harrowing nature of the crime is going to come out in open court. Much greater, because we know that in rape cases and things like that, sometimes the case doesn't go ahead purely because the victim is too frightened to relive
but that's part of this, isn't it? That if... somebody who had committed a rape thinks there's a chance that she or he will renege on this and back out of this court case, then they will deny it, they won't plead guilty because there's a chance they could get off. Whereas if they know that their sentence could be cut by a third, if they just go in and plead guilty, then it might encourage them to, for want of a better word, do the right thing.
Maybe it should be horses for courses. Maybe there shouldn't be one standard procedure. And Kev's right. The individual judge should outline the rules to the defendant from the start.
But if we're taking the case of a rape victim, are we thinking about the victim in this? Because I think you would be pretty upset to know that your perpetrator has got a third off their sentence just by admitting to such a hideous crime.
Well, but there's only was it less than 2% of reported rapes end up in a conviction?
I mean, it's woefully low.
It's horrifically, absolutely horrifically low. So if we could increase that figure, that would be a good thing. But I think rape, because of the nature of the crime and sometimes the difficulty in proving it. Isn't the best example. But if you take a burglar, somebody for assault, even manslaughter or murder, you can. If you're gonna get them to put their hand up and say, "Yeah, I did it." Now, in the riots, it was mainly because they'd been filming each other and putting it on the internet. That's why they pleaded guilty. They were caught red-handed. They were bragging and boasting about it. The numbskulls.
I agree, but you'd also hope that sentences are very severe anyway. And again, that's another incentive to do the right thing in court. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Because 1/3 off a 30-year sentence, is worth having if it's 1/3 off a 12-year sentence. You see what I mean?
Do long sentences work?
I think they do. I think deterrent works.
Broderick from London, what's your view when it comes to a third off for pleading guilty? Do you think this is a sensible approach?
Well, I think prisons are too soft anyway. The people's perception of a prison is meant to be like hard-working, you're miserable, you're doing your sentence. It's not like that. I live next to a prison and know some people, and you get a third off for good behaviour anyway, and they play pool, they play snooker, they watch TV when they want, they do weightlifting, and all various other things. The only thing that they don't do is go out and have a good drink or drugs with their friends. That's Broderick, the only sentence.
Isn't the punishment the fact that their freedom has been taken away? So their freedom to leave the prison is in fact the punishment. And don't we need to look at ways at rehabilitating individuals within the prison so that they don't reoffend? And part of that's maybe treating them like humans and giving them other skills.
I'm not saying treat them like animals, whip them and all that. But when they're in prison, they make new friends. So all they're virtually missing is going out with their original friends, doing drink or drugs or whatever doing. It's not a punishment. There must be something else. I haven't thought of it yet.
Broderick, if they were so cushy, and the bars and the high walls would be there to stop people getting in. In fact, they're there to stop getting people out. People don't want to be in prison by and large. You might get the odd case, but do you accept if you can get people to plead guilty and you save their victims the ordeal of going through a trial, that's worth doing, even if you think once they're in prison you should take away the snooker tables. But wouldn't it be better if they were pleading guilty, if they're guilty, instead of going to a trial and putting everyone to expense, trouble and an emotional war?
I agree with that, especially for rape victims, women, and, to go through all that, it must be horrendous for them. If they plead guilty, yes, maybe knock a third off their sentences.
I do wonder whether the third is the bit that's troubling. That's a lot off a sentence for pleading guilty, and if you were a victim of rape or some sort of sexual assault, that might be really hard to take, but then so would a court case. Broderick, it's a really hard one. Thank you very much for your call. Stan from Essex, I believe you've spent time in prison?
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, I spent 4 months in prison, yeah.
And
I can assure everybody it's not a cushy little holiday camp that they think it is.
Are there pool tables?
Yes, there is pool tables if you're lucky enough to get out yourself to use them.
Broderick thinks it's too cushy in there if it's got a pool table.
Has Roderick been inside?
No, I don't think he has.
So I don't think he knows what he's talking about then.
I honestly can't be sure. But there's an idea that we want prisons to be real punishments, so we want them to be these sort of Victorian cells, cold and, you're having to sleep on the floor.
That's quite an accurate description of what it's like. Actually, you spend most of the time locked up in a little tiny cell with another person. You have to defecate and urinate in front of that person. You know, it's not pleasant. You know, and my issue with it is. The majority of people that are in there, they're in there multiple times. They're recidivists, for want of a better word. You know, and a lot of the reason they're in there is because they can't read, they can't write, they haven't had any opportunities in life, stuff like that. And crime's the only thing they can do. It costs a hell of a lot of money to keep somebody locked up. It costs, you know, many, many tens of thousands of pounds per year. There's no opportunity or very little opportunity for people to better themselves while they're in there, and it kind of becomes a training camp just to become a better criminal.
So, university for criminality, essentially.
Yeah, basically, yeah, because that's all there is for people to talk about, and there's no way to better yourself. I mean, there's a few little courses you can do, you know, basic reading, basic maths, that kind of stuff, but nothing that's going to give you an opportunity to break the cycle of going out, committing crime, and getting locked up and put back in again.
Well, last week we were speaking to Fred Syriacs, and he is setting up restaurants in prisons to train prisoners how to sort of food hygiene and give them lots of qualifications. That means it might be easier for them to get out. So there are things trying to get up and running.
You could have a lot of people working in the cooking industry, which is you know, very badly paid, very long hours, but if not a lot of incentive there really. But it's a good idea. It's a start.
Okay.
You know.
Right. I think we've got distracted from the topic though, although that was incredibly interesting. Will this work? Plead guilty, get a third off your sentence. Will it encourage more people to plead guilty?
I think it will, yeah. But I think you'll also have a lot more people that are not guilty going guilty just to get a third off a sentence.
Well, that's not what we want, but that's an interesting way of looking at it, Stan. Thank you very much for your call. Sasha from London, do you worry about that, to create a situation where if you plead guilty you get time off might mean that innocent people are spending time in jail?
I don't care about people that are innocent. I care about the convicts going to prison. Good afternoon, panel. How are you all doing? I hope you're all well. I was initially, when I was a small child, was molested by a school teacher. In my later years, I brought him to justice and he went to prison.
Okay.
Now, the only reason he went to prison was because he went not guilty at trial. Now, he was found guilty of an abuse over a period of time of myself and two others whom I had no knowledge of. Then later on, after he'd done his prison term, he was then sentenced again, but because he went guilty, he had a suspended sentence. Now, the trauma that he has caused me is still live.
Yes.
Now, he might be an old man now, but my trauma is still real. Now, the only reason that man didn't do extra jail time was because he went guilty. You were already guilty. You've been found guilty in a court of law.
I'm also presuming...
by a judge.
I'm also making an assumption here, and I know nothing about the case, because he'd already served time, that meant that he could get a suspended sentence for the crime that he was subsequently convicted of. But had he pleaded guilty initially, he probably would have still went to jail, but just for less time. Now, would that have had a negative impact on you, Sasha?
I think that it's negative anyway, because I mean he had a 3-year sentence, and I mean he destroyed my life. I mean 3 years to my life, is it worth it? And there were 15 other people that came forward once I came forward. It wasn't a small amount of people, and I just think that the balance of scales isn't quite right, you know.
So we're not considering the victim enough when we look at sentencing.
No, not at all, not at all. And I think there should be certain crimes where guilty, if you do try to get away with going guilty, I mean, I say get away with it. It's not ever getting away with it. But if you think that you're going to get a lesser sentence for such a corrupt and nasty crime, then it shouldn't really come into the procedures whatsoever.
Sasha, I can hear your pain through the call. It's palpable, and I suppose that's what we're talking about. There, you've got a victim of a sexual assault at a very young age. Horrendous. Yeah. And if you then start to think that somebody can get away with spending less time in prison just by pleading guilty, that just doesn't feel right. No.
Sasha, my heart goes out to you, and I hope you find some peace. But presumably your argument is 3 years wasn't long enough. If it was reduced to 2, it certainly wouldn't be. But that's presumably because you think the punishment for the nature of that crime isn't long enough. But would 10 years, 20 years of...
I just think euthanasia would have been better for him, you know. I mean, he committed crimes over a period of 20 years. I was his first victim that we know of. Yeah. And that was back in the 70s. But the thing is you can't ignore the history of a person. You can't just say, you know, they're not the best person on earth. Let's see if we can't rehabilitate them. Some of these people not only don't want to be, but have no, have no inkling. It's just the way they're made.
Sasha, thank you very much for sharing your story with us. It's really harrowing, but that kind of falls into the lap of your argument there, Mike, that actually it should be punishment and you should serve your time. Absolutely. Where you have over the last, 50 years, 60 years become a more caring society, but I think we mix up more caring with, not looking at the real problems that we've just heard. Caring for the wrong people, perhaps, I don't know. We'll have to move on to our next debate now, and we're asking...